When Cleopatra died, some said it was a snake. Others believed it was poison, hidden in a comb, slipped into perfume, or maybe even sipped like tea. Was it suicide, murder, drama? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. In ancient Egypt, poison wasn't just a weapon. It was a craft. And healing it, that was even stranger. And honestly, can you blame her? If Cleopatra didn't have a secret stash of poison, what were her other options? Spend the rest of her life being paraded through Rome by a gloating Caesar in a chariot made of her own stolen gold? Hard pass. Even a snake starts to look like a pretty clean exit. But Cleopatra's story is just one drop in a much deeper vial. Poison was everywhere in ancient Egypt, on farms, in food, in politics, and sometimes even in medicine. And where there was poison, there were antidotes, recipes so weird they could make a stomach turn faster than the poison itself. This is the story of how ancient Egyptians fought back against death. With onions, with spells, with moldy bread and dead lizards, and with doctors who were sometimes more terrifying than the toxins. So, ready for your dose? Let's say you've just been bitten by a venomous snake. Your leg is swelling, your vision is blurring, and your only hope is an ancient Egyptian healer running toward you, not with anti-venom, but with a lump of moldy bread and a whispered invocation. Yes, moldy bread. It wasn't just a desperate guess. Egyptians used it to treat infected wounds, unknowingly tapping into the antibacterial powers of mold centuries before modern science would discover penicillin. The bread wasn't clean, but it worked. If your symptoms didn't improve, the next step might be stranger still. Lizard blood, smeared directly on the bite. The belief was simple. The cure might lie in the same world as the cause. If a creature could deliver death, perhaps another could draw it out. The logic danced between medicine and magic. Some antidotes went further. Crushed insects, dung, ash, mixed into thick pastes or boiled with herbs to create dark-smelling salves. Animal waste wasn't seen as filth, but as a source of energy and transformation. In some cases, these were applied to the skin. In others, they were swallowed. Whether they worked or just made you forget the pain, it's hard to say. And then there were the enemas. Lots of them. Egyptians believed that sickness, especially poison, had to be flushed out, literally. So they'd take a hollow reed, insert it into the patient's backside, and squeeze in a mixture of oil, water, or herbal brew. No metaphors here, just ancient plumbing. If you were lucky, it worked. If not, well, you probably regretted your last meal. Some recipes called for beer, others for cow bile, garlic, and even powdered scorpion. One papyrus describes using the body of the very thing that stung you, dried, crushed, and swallowed, as a remedy. It sounds wild, it was. But to the Egyptians, nature wasn't split into safe or dangerous. It was powerful, and if you understood it, you could survive. These treatments weren't random. They were the results of centuries of trial, error, and observation, passed down through scribes and temple healers. Some of them failed. Some saved lives. And some still have scientists scratching their heads today. You might laugh now, but if your modern doctor reached for a dead lizard and a fistful of camel dung, you'd run. In ancient Egypt, you'd stay, because that might be your only hope. For most Egyptians, poison didn't arrive in a jeweled goblet. It came silently, hidden in spoiled bread, the sting of a scorpion, or the water drawn from a canal that looked clean, but wasn't. The heat was constant, and so was the rot. Meat spoiled quickly, grain could go moldy, and without the knowledge of microbes, the best protection was the senses: smell, sight, memory. Food that seemed off might still be eaten, especially by the poor. There was no backup, only risk. Drinking water carried its own dangers. Nile water was sacred, but not always safe. During the flood season, silt and waste could turn even clear-looking water into something dangerous. Stomach cramps, fever, vomiting. It may have been food, it may have been water, but the line was often blurred. Scorpions, meanwhile, were everywhere. They hid in bedding, in shoes, in the corners of mud-brick homes. One sting could leave a child writhing in pain or an adult unable to work. Some bites killed slowly, others didn't, but it was never clear which kind you had until hours passed. Healers responded with garlic pastes or poultices made from crushed herbs. Sometimes they tried to heat the wound or rub in copper salts, hoping to draw the danger to the surface. There were also prayers, protection spells, an appeal to the gods as the swelling spread. Snake bites were less common, but no less feared. Small desert vipers blended into fields and storage jars, striking when disturbed. The bite might burn, the skin might blacken. Remedies varied: crushed onion, oil, sometimes beer. Not because it numbed the pain, but because it was believed to carry cleansing power. The truth is, most Egyptians lived on the edge of something that could kill them without warning. There were no hospitals, no antivenoms, no sterile dressings, only what could be gathered, ground, and guessed at. One healer might tell you to sleep it off. Another might place a charm around your neck and whisper the name of a god. A third might pour a bitter brew down your throat and hope your body knew what to do with it. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But when death came from the everyday, even the smallest cure could feel like a miracle. Somewhere near the edge of a small village, a man begins to convulse. His lips are dry, his eyes darting. A bite mark festers on his leg, purple and hot. His family has sent for help, not to a temple, not to the gods directly, but to a man trained in both scrolls and silence. He arrives with a leather pouch tied at the hip. Inside, crushed minerals, linen strips, strips of dried herbs, and a curved copper tool worn smooth by years of use. This is a sunu, a physician. He's no magician, no priest, yet his presence is sacred. His knowledge comes not from visions, but from the hard-earned trust of papyri and patient after patient. He washes the wound with natron and oil, then packs it with a mixture of crushed garlic and beer sediment. It's one of the simpler remedies from the Ebers Papyrus, recommended for inflamed injuries, one of many hundreds committed to memory or carried with him in fragments. His face shows no uncertainty, but he knows too well what failure can mean. If the man dies, the healer may not be welcome in this house again, or this village, or worse. Not far away, in a temple shaded by palms, a Wab priest recites words from a scroll. His task is different. He is the cleanser. He prepares potions for purification, not only of the body, but of the soul. His tools are incense, water drawn before sunrise, and prayer. When a child is poisoned and no remedy seems to work, families often turn to him, not for treatment, but for protection. If the illness is seen as punishment or curse, the healer's hands must be clean, both physically and spiritually. Then there are the Sao, men and women who walk the narrow space between healer and sorcerer. They speak spells while grinding ingredients. They trace divine symbols onto clay pots or into ash and blow them gently over the patient's body. Their words are medicine, their reputation dangerous. If someone dies under a sore's care, suspicion doesn't just fall on their skill, it falls on their intent. There was power in healing, but also risk. In Egypt, to touch the sick was to touch the boundary of life itself. You were expected to fix what others feared. But if your remedy failed, if the scorpion bite swelled, or the poison spread, or the fever broke not in sweat but silence, Then even the scrolls couldn't shield you. It's hard to imagine now, a healer reading a line from a scroll that begins, "For the poison that eats the blood," and hoping the mixture of honey yeast and black seed will save a stranger's life before the sun sets. And yet, they did it. Day after day, armed with rituals, recipes, and a kind of courage most modern medicine has long forgotten. Of course, if you cured someone too quickly, you might still be accused of witchcraft. That, too, was a hazard of the job. A boy lies motionless on a reed mat. His mother kneels beside him, whispering a prayer to Isis, while a healer places a warm paste of crushed onion over his chest. The smell stings the eyes, but no one moves. The ritual must not be interrupted. In ancient Egypt, medicine was rarely just physical. Every action, ingredient ingredient carried spiritual weight. Illness could be a wound of the body, yes, but it could also be the mark of a curse, the result of imbalance, or the influence of a malevolent spirit. Healing required more than knowledge. It demanded belief. A healer might recite a string of divine names while preparing an herbal decoction, not to impress or deceive, but to invoke protection, to align the treatment with sacred power. In one preserved spell, the healer calls upon the gods to bind the poison as Horus bound Seth, invoking myth to restrain harm. These weren't side rituals. They were part of the cure. Amulets were tied around the wrists of the sick, not as decoration, but as shields, charged with hieroglyphs shaped like protective gods or etched with spells to guard the vulnerable. They were worn during treatment, during sleep, sometimes even buried with the dead in case healing came too late. Some remedies worked both ways. A poultice of frankincense and oil could ease swelling, but its scent also pleased the gods. Honey, one of their most trusted ingredients, fought infection and was also believed to carry divine purity. There was no line between practical and mystical, just layers of purpose woven into a single act. To modernize, it's easy to separate ritual from reason. But to an Egyptian healer, applying garlic to a wound while speaking sacred words wasn't contradiction, it was commitment. You used every tool, herb, spell, symbol, not because you were confused, but because the stakes were life itself. And when death hovered at the edge of the room, who wouldn't want the gods on their side? In the royal courts of ancient Egypt, death did not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it came quietly, disguised in a cup of wine, a tincture of herbs, or a sudden illness no one could explain. Pharaoh Hatshepsut ruled for over 2 decades before falling ill. Her death was labeled natural, but her stepson, Thutmose III, took the throne swiftly and erased her legacy wherever he could. Ramses III, too, faced threats from within. A harem conspiracy, documented in the judicial papyrus, named servants and royal women plotting his downfall. The means? Spells, daggers, and perhaps poison. Royal doctors lived close to power. They knew the body intimately, its strengths, its weaknesses, and what substances might exploit both. With access to the most guarded ingredients, rare resins, toxic minerals, venoms harvested in secret, they were both healers and potential threats. A trusted hand administering medicine could just as easily tilt the scale toward death. There's no evidence of a formal poisoners' guild. But temples controlled knowledge, and knowledge meant control. The same institutions that trained priests and physicians also held the recipes, the rituals, the instructions for both healing and harming. The line between service and silence could vanish overnight. To cure a king was an honor. To fail him, a death sentence. A rash mistaken for a curse. A fever misread as betrayal. All it took was one poorly timed remedy, one royal breath that never returned. And the healer, once favored, might be imprisoned, exiled, or worse. Whispers likely filled the halls of palaces more than written accusations ever did. If someone died suddenly, people asked questions. Who served the wine? Who mixed the balm? Who stood alone with the body? And so, every successful treatment in the palace wasn't just a triumph, it was survival. A physician might save the pharaoh's life today, only to be blamed for his cough tomorrow. The court was no place for error, and no place for innocence. Those who dealt in healing walked a path lined with power, secrecy, and fear. Because when a ruler dies without a wound, the deadliest weapon is always the one you can't see. Some of the oldest surviving medical texts in human history were written on papyrus in ancient Egypt. Fragile scrolls, preserved by dry desert air, carry not just ink, but urgency. These weren't books of theory. They were manuals for saving lives. The Ebers Papyrus, dated to around 1550 BCE, stretches over 100 feet long and holds more than 700 remedies. It reads like a physician's encyclopedia. Instructions for healing burns, calming coughs, removing bad blood, and, in many cases, neutralizing poisons. One translated line suggests, "For poison in the belly, mix sweet beer, celery seed, and natron. Give in the morning until the pain stops." It's direct, desperate, and likely tested more than once. The Hearst Papyrus, slightly shorter but just as revealing, deals specifically with toxic substances. Among its pages are formulas to counter snakebite, scorpion venom, and unknown fevers. One remedy includes crushed juniper, water, and a whispered chant, to be repeated 3 times as the mixture is applied. It's a rare moment where plant chemistry and spoken word come together in a single act of healing. Then there's the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical text unlike anything else from the ancient world. Focused on trauma and injury, it outlines how to treat head wounds, broken bones, and punctures with startling precision. One section advises applying honey to an open wound, not out of ritual, but to keep it free of rot. Today, we know honey has antibacterial properties. Back then, they knew it simply kept people alive. The language in these papyri is firm, even when the treatments sound strange. One cure calls for the ashes of a burnt lizard mixed with resin and applied to the skin. Another suggests the use of cow dung if the swelling moves. A third involves placing clay from a temple floor beneath the tongue of a delirious patient. The boundary between practical and symbolic was fluid, but the intent was always the same: stop the dying. Modern researchers have confirmed that many of these ingredients, garlic, onions, honey, copper salts, do possess healing properties. Others are harder to explain. But together, they show a system of medicine both advanced and experimental. What's most remarkable isn't just the content, it's the confidence. These recipes weren't guesses scribbled in haste, they were written to last. Passed from hand to hand, healer to apprentice, each line was a lifeline. And more than 3,000 years later, some of those lines still hold. Much of what we now call modern medicine was once practiced by torchlight, recorded on papyrus, and passed from healer to healer by memory and trust. In ancient Egypt, healing was never simple, but it was always urgent. The use of honey to treat wounds is now backed by science. Mouldy bread, once pressed into cuts by instinct and tradition, turned out to contain the very fungi that would lead to penicillin. Even the poisons they feared, snake venom, scorpion sting, have become the basis for drugs that regulate blood pressure, reduce clotting, and ease pain. What was once ritual is now research. What was once a whispered cure is now a clinical trial. And yet, the core remains the same, a human life held at the edge and another human doing whatever they can to pull it back. We tend to imagine history as a line, moving forward, shedding the old. But medicine is a circle. The knowledge we rediscover is often what someone once tried, recorded, and quietly believed in long before we understood why it worked. So if you've ever taken antibiotics, or used honey for a sore throat, or marveled at how venom became medicine, remember that long ago, someone in linen robes stood at a bedside doing the same, and they wrote it down. For us. You've just walked through thousands of years of fear, faith, and fragile hope, through remedies scrawled in ink and whispered in temples, through poison that took lives and knowledge that saved them. If that moved you, it's not just history, it's legacy. So if you want to see more stories like this, ones that dig deeper, think slower, and respect the strange brilliance of the past, subscribe. Like the video, leave a comment below. Tell us, what cure surprised you most? What danger made you flinch? And remember, some of the world's most powerful medicines were once kept on scrolls, guarded in temples, buried with the dead. Now they're here, waiting to be rediscovered.